Hi folks, welcome to episode 10 of Cretacea Park Build, and this time it's the Tyrant's Kingdom. Last time we did the approach and the viewing area, and quick overview with a hint of the habitat, because I had already built it. This time we're going to start with that viewing area that imitates the one in the Edmontosaurus exhibit, and move into some of the caretaking facilities for the Tyrannosaurs and also for the Edmontosaurs. So we're going to start from this viewing position and take a quick tour of the habitat since we didn't look at that the last time. So coming out of the viewing area, we get to this raised area, which also allows the Tyrannosaurs to look over into the Edmontosaurus exhibit. A little bit of enrichment for them. As we move down the slope toward the viewing area, we go past the water hole, and you can see the standoff that's built around the viewing windows to keep the Tyrannosaurs from smashing it with their heads in the hope of a tasty treat, perhaps. And it's just about scales right. You can see the fencing there through the rocks. This is going to be a two-part habitat eventually to separate Tyrannosaurs as necessary. And here's the start of the care building with enough space for the two current Tyrannosaurs to sleep. So now we're going to get into the build. So since the building was unfinished, obviously finishing has to happen. And I started that with putting the floor in for the lower part of the building for the second habitat. It wasn't needed at first because I kept both of the Tyrannosaurs in the front part of the exhibit. So putting in floors, putting up the walls to either side, dealing with the fact that the terrain is kind of intruding in the building, which I don't want, and cleaning up some of the bits from the quick throwdown of the walls. It was, however, ending up slightly off grid, so things are not lining up perfectly for me, which is making a little bit of extra work for myself. You know, honestly, it would have been faster to scrap what I had there and start from scratch so everything was on the grid. But you will see me fiddling with that, with things like that wall being in the wrong place to line up with the original opening wall for into the habitat. I'll be using occasionally the scale feature in order to make things fit with fewer pieces. Height here after a little bit of width. And I still mostly wanted to keep it on the grid. And as you can see here, the grid wanted me to space out those blocks. And that wasn't the effect I wanted, obviously. So rather than doing the smart thing, I'm giving myself the work to clean everything up. This will be a bug through the whole build of this structure. I believe I mentioned this is going to be a structure that will serve both of these adjacent habitats, and it will need to stretch over the chasm that is sort of the emergency don't let the Tyrannosaurs eat the other exhibits feature. And we have to have a way to get our keepers over that. To be honest, this building is not fully thought out quite yet. I've got a good idea of how I wanted to connect the two of them, but I'm still wrestling with how I want the keepers to get to the building. What is the best way to bring them in? Do they have a path that runs down through the chasm to get to the building? Do they come in from the riverside, possibly also through the chasm? Do they have some kind of elevated pathway from the viewing area that takes them over the Tyrannosaurs? Each of these have their pluses and minuses, both in the nominal world of the Prehistoric Kingdom, but also in the practicality of making this happen and keeping things mostly out of sight of the visitors. So I've moved on to putting in the elevated platform that will let keepers look into both of these exhibits and do some work with the animals from that. It's you know, it's dealing with a really dangerous animal. Big tyrannosaurs will gobble down a keeper if they're given a chance, and that's really bad for publicity. It's bad for insurance for the zoo, and I don't know how much of this will play into the game, but I'm trying to keep an idea that this is actually trying to be done, and if it were actually trying to be done, you wouldn't want your exhibits eating your keepers or your guests. So uh, still futzing around with getting things lined up in the right heights and everything, and as usual, getting focused enough to not pay attention to which tool I grabbed, and I pulled a lot of those hay spreads out of the original sleeping area, so I had to go and put them back, or at least some version of them, and cleaning up things like getting the rocks uh, from poking through the walls. Um, Not something you really want in your building. So having mostly gotten that building done, I extended the platform out across the chasm to the Edmontosaurus side, and it started building a structure for them. And you can see an Edmontosaurus is so eager to get in here, providing a good scale for me to gauge how big things need to be. So having laid out the shape of the building, I dropped it down and then raised the walls back up so that they would be a good height for the platform. And then the Edmontosaurus demonstrated I'm not doing this right because when he stands up, his head goes through the floor. Um, that was unfortunate in terms of the original layout. The obvious answer would be to just drop the terrain down there. Um, Down, not up. Uh, and I obviously had to get all the vegetation out of the way, because if this is the barn for the animals, they're going to be coming in and out all the time, and trees and bushes are not going to stay in their way uh, for very long. A little bit more work with the rock work, making sure the separation chasm stays in place, and make sure it's not in the building, and now playing with some of the terrain outside the building in order to make it easier for the animals to get down and in there. So um, still having trouble with them sticking their heads through there because I haven't taken it down far enough, and this is where I do that. You will see me going back and forth between working on the building and then doing cleanup, partially as I discover new problems, partially as what I do unveils problems, and or I make changes that make me want to do something a little differently. One of the things I will eventually be getting to here is deciding that the building isn't big enough for the animals on this side, because ultimately Edmontosaurus won't be the only one in here. Because long term, I want to have a safari going through this area with a lot of the Hell Creek animals. So in order to make the building bigger, I decided to grab the outside wall and slide it down and then fill in the gaps. So it's notably bigger. I suspect if and when those other animals get into the game and I get to add them to this exhibit, I will want to expand this structure, because I think overall I want to have the barn for the animals in the same area and able to accommodate all of them, unless I have to incorporate separate habitats that the safari ride goes through. some of that will depend on how the gameplay actually works, both in how the safari rides will work and how the ability, excuse me, the ability of the keepers comes into play. So a bit of a jump in the recording there, and now I'm moving on to putting in the ventilation uh, bits using the slat wall there and sizing them to keep down the minimum number of pieces. This particular piece stretches well, so in the long run that's a good thing. It doesn't look bad and it keeps the piece count down. Always a handy thing in these kinds of games. And I have to do it for both halves of the building. The original building didn't have that at all, and it will get that so that all of the animals can be happy with this, or at least as happy as the game will let them be. They probably functionally won't care in the game mechanic if they're too hot in the building, but in the real world you'd have to pay some attention to that. Also, just be able to air it out and such like. Uh, Getting all those in place will be followed by a trim band using the metal pieces in order to offset it and get a real world kind of effect where the slat wall is not in direct contact with the roof. You probably noticed me checking, make sure the animals could get in and out and not get away. I lost some video here, as is seeming to be the common case for me. So we get another jump, and the building is now finished. You can see it's got floor with bedding inside, and you can see the viewing area from above. We even have an endorser trying it out for you. The roof is on. It's a low profile roof, again, so it won't look outstanding from a distance to the guests. It's a flat roof. I really would love to get some ventilation or other things on there, but I don't have the props yet. So looking down the path between the two buildings, I couldn't scooch the thing left or right much, but getting down there, you can see there are lights for the keepers to be able to see what they're doing. And all the animals have bedding. The roof is there. It's nice and low profile. And as I spin it around, you get to see that I worked to blend it into the environment. And if I back out to any of the viewing points, you'll see the structure is very hard to pick out for the most part. And that line right down toward the building and the entrance to the sleeping area really can't be seen from the road. You can get a glimpse of it from that viewing platform. The most visible thing is the bridge between the two buildings, and you can see that from where we started out in this video, the viewing platform near the Edmontosaurus exhibit. And that at the moment is not something I have figured out a way to fix. There's one of our Tyrannosaurs taking advantage of his enrichment. Subsequently, I moved on to finishing out the visitors area, and I really want a gift shop here. And once again, I'm using an information center to be a guest draw to bring bodies in there as if there were and something that they would come to. As usual, starting with a foundational wall, and now you can see it's going right into that rock wall I had previously built as part of the path to the rest area. So having determined where the entrance is going to be, I'm going to have to adjust that. Do things like take out the plants that are now in the building, because that just doesn't work out well, and mess with the rocks, changing them, pulling them a little taller, and giving them a similar rock facade to the rest area, so that this sort of back out of the way area is themed similarly. And as usual, accidentally punching things and getting double elements that you want to get rid of if you want to keep your performance as good as it can get. Um, anyway, so this is going to have the rock facade like the rest area does. And I'm going to need to adjust the plants around it. And the back side of it adds less needful. But that sort of thing reminds me that I really probably should go back to the animal care building, and as I did in the Nasutoceratops exhibit, change the public-facing walls from concrete to stone so that they are less obvious. Um, so trying to keep the same sorts of planting that I had already put in to maintain the theme and fill out the areas so it doesn't look very chunky. Um, my thought was I needed it a little bit taller on the walls so it's tall enough to hide the dome of the information center, which I don't want seen in this build. And then I threw the roof on, once again jumping the gun, because I subsequently decided to put flooring in when I saw what could be seen through the doorway. Dropping down a level with a bit of slanted roof to better blend it into the build that already is sitting there. Putting in a bit of skylight there to take advantage of that slanted wall. And then, since we don't have a roof skylight of the size I was looking for, I decided to use a window, which will glow when glowing windows become a thing. And I wanted to set up a run of flat skylight windows along the passageway that guests would use, even if they're not visiting the guest shop, to get to the forthcoming second viewing area for the second Tyrannosaur habitat. So a little bit of fooling around, getting the spacing on the windows a bit better, and then it becomes time to pull the second habitat over and duplicating it. Turned out that there were some other things grouped with it, which I didn't really want at this time, and you'll ultimately see me dealing with those. After putting it in the first place and lining up the entrance with what was going to be the passageway, I came to realize that the viewing windows came around and looked into the rock that separates things. Uh, yeah, you saw that save because I couldn't select things that were part of those groups. But after saving it, I was able to convince it to do that by going back and reloading the building. So you saw a quick glimpse of that. So I've moved the building out now so that those windows won't look into the rock. And you can see some of the extraneous elements that came along with it. So now it's time to extend the corridor into the viewing area and take out the wall that will prevent guests from going in there, and extend the line of skylights so that the guests aren't in a completely dank and dark tunnel. I imagine the gift shop probably treats that as a art gallery or something. So now you see the name of the gift shop. I managed to not video doing the letters, but once you see one set of letters, you get a good idea of how they work. And so I was fiddling around trying to get the sign to the right size and in the right place, and deciding that I didn't have a nice enough blend of the gardening features in the area to lead in. You can see that I've already installed the floor in there. Um, that will also serve as a path to get guests out to the other viewing area. But when you look in that door, you can see that it's an information center. So I decided to finesse that a little bit by putting in a separator wall. I'd rather have a blank wall in there than an information center, at least what looks like an information center, for what's supposed to be a gift shop. So, that's a quick, dirty fix. And in future builds, when the game is real and not just an alpha, I take a lot more care, I think, and put some stuff in there if I have something to sell. This last bit of the build video is a bit of a teaser because at this point I have completed all the animals that were in Cretacea Part 1. And we're still in alpha, but beta hasn't come along. And that means I can go back and bring in some of the alternate species. So I'm building a stairway down to an unfinished part of the park here, at least the start of it, and messing around to blend it in, getting the now extraneous vegetation out of the way. And we won't actually be seeing that in this video, but I will be running for you some shots of our resident Tyrannosaurs in their habitat. And that will be coming up as soon as I finish this bed. This whole thing went on a little bit longer than I had originally expected it to. So I'm going to set it up to go even faster than usual and zip through the bit of fussing with this so we can get into an overview of the exhibit and then on further to the Tyrannosaurus. How does that sound? Well, too late, it's done. And so now you can see the double viewing areas, the spread of the spanning building between the two Hell Creek exhibits, and I think it's looking pretty good. Pretty happy with the overall look of it. It's not terribly exotic, but it's cool. And it has tyrannosaurs in it. Male and female. It's leather hide skin, so they don't look that different. But you know, when breeding gets in, they'll have their differences. I didn't manage to catch a shot of one of them deciding he wanted to nose the glass. I guess he's cranky about not being able to reach the tidbits that show up there. For some reason, my Tyrannosaurs want to hang around the waterhole. I haven't seen them go into the building, although they're supposed to be able to. And they don't seem to want to go up onto that raised area near the building. Who knows? Take their naps next to the pond. And there we go. See, there's one of them looking for lunch in all the wrong places. And so that's pretty much what I have to say for this bit. And so like it if you did, subscribe if you'd like to. I'll do more of these. Uh-oh. Bye now.